Welcome back to the First Team. I am Joe DeLeone. Joining me as always, my good friend and co-host Ryan Roberts. Today we are going to be reacting to the top performers at day 2 of the Senior Bowl. Today, instead of approaching it the way that we did on day 1, we had a ton to talk about. We broke down a ton of big names. Today we're just going to be expanding that list. We're going to be sharing guys that maybe didn't get that same love on day 1, but still did well and really built on their performances heading into day 2. Ryan, I want to start us off talking about some of these defensive linemen. I've got 4 here that I think that are just really having a really strong time. Lietu Latu from UCLA, not a surprising one. We knew that this guy was going to show up and do really well in these one-on-ones. I thought that Brandon Dorlus from Oregon showed us some great things. Adiza Isaac from Penn State is starting to really establish himself as maybe the better Penn State pass rusher. And then the last one that we're going to talk about here, David Robinson, the Missouri Darius Robinson. Jeez.
David Robinson, the great power forward for the San Antonio Spurs.
In good company. Darius Robinson, though, I thought had a really just technically sound day rushing from a number of alignments during the one-on-ones.
He's kind of a freaky dude, man. I was trying to look at the official measurements because I know it was over 34 inches. I know he's playing on the edge at over 280 pounds. I mean, Joe, we always talk about this, and it sounds very strange to talk about as grown men on a podcast, but the kid on the hoof is just a physically impressive cat, man. I mean, like, he looks the part. He's the first man off the bus type of dude, the guy that's going to be standing at the front of the line and taking you through the crowd. And then when you kind of go face to face with the opponent for the first time, you want him at the front of the line. Like, he's that type of dude. He really is. Funny enough, I remember watching his 2022 film. I didn't really like it that much because he was playing inside a whole lot more than on the edge. And he just didn't really seem overly physical and a guy that could work at the point of attack, and his hands kind of were just iffy. Like, you always saw the athleticism. You always saw the kind of some of the brute strength that he has. But then in 2023, they moved him to the edge full time in Missouri, and he just looks comfortable. And I think the coolest thing about him today was it was against somebody pretty good. I can't remember who it was. It was someone at right tackle, though. He worked to the upfield shoulder and made it appear that he was just going to hit a speed to power conversion. Like, he was going to stick his foot in the ground and go right down his chest. He kind of did a little shimmy, worked back outside, and then dipped and ripped and showed bend at 280 plus pounds. That's like just rare, man. Like, you just don't see that type of stuff. So this kid at 6'4 plus, at 280 plus pounds with 34-inch arms, he could play outside as like a 5-tech. I think he could be a sub-package rusher that works more inside at times. Pretty scheme diverse defensive lineman that has a lot of traits to work with.
Well, so that's the really big thing. And I shared a clip on my Twitter for anyone who wants to check it. He was rushing outside, obviously, the whole time the past 2 days, but there was one rep he had against, he was lined up in like a wide one against a center and really quick hands. I just think that a lot of times we get these one-on-ones and guys aren't super technically sound, and they're kind of just trying to, like Devondre Sweat's just trying to run everybody over, and that's his plan. But to see that a guy of this size and length has the quick hands and the thought processing and just the quick awareness to know how to react in certain situations, to make that counter move from different alignments, it's really exciting. And I brought up Brandon Dorlus from Oregon. He was somebody at Oregon who, we're going to see a reminder of it this week, where at Oregon, he was playing all the way out to a 9, and then he was coming all the way down into a 1 technique. And he's long enough and scheme diverse enough to play a 3-4 defensive end or as a 4-3 defensive tackle. Like, he's very, very well built. And I think that both of those guys, man, that just the versatility you can get from either of those players could be really advantageous to take either one of them on day 2.
Dorlus is kind of a weird guy, Joe, because he's always been a guy that I was like, I kind of assumed at some point in his Oregon career he would move inside full time, but I mean, he's just always kind of stuck at the edge a little bit, at least a decent clip at Oregon. This week, I felt like, especially early on in the week, he was playing exclusively inside for a little bit, just being a guy that's going to be rushed from the interior. I'm very interested to see what type of team likes him. Is he going to be a 3-4 team? Is he going to be a team that likes to run a lot of 4-man? I'm not really sure positionally where he ends up, but I do know that he does have just a really nice profile at 270 plus pounds that can have alignment as a pass rusher. There's no doubt. Did you mention I know we talked about him before the show, but I missed him if you mentioned him just kind of in your quick overview. Did we mention Eric Watts from UConn? Did you
I
get
wrote
to
I
him in
wrote
that
him
one?
down, and we talked about him a
Yeah.
little bit yesterday. But yeah,
Yeah.
there are a couple reps where, man, his power with his length it's really exciting the way that he's able to drive guys' chest back. I forget the clip that I posted that he had. I forget who it was, but he completely just popped somebody's chest open and drove him. I think it was the
Yeah.
Texas tackle that he just completely
Christian Jones.
physically, yeah,
Yeah.
just outmatched the hell out of him. I've loved watching Eric Watts. He's a guy that I knew that was on the RPM radar, but wasn't really on my
Yeah.
draft radar. That maybe is a day 3 guy. BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. Bet online, where the game starts.
I think I mentioned briefly yesterday, but he was a guy that I really liked the 2022 film. He had a really good game against Michigan, particularly in 2022. 2023 just kind of disappeared a little bit. And I think it was partly because UConn just wasn't a very good football team, and I think that some guys just kind of went to the wayside and maybe lost a little bit of interest in the season. But that kid with 35 plus inch arms, with the 6'5 plus, with the 275 pounds or 274 pounds, whatever the heck he weighed in at, that kid has tools for days to work with. So I talked about him yesterday, and I would just like to reiterate it again. He is my guy this year in mid to late day 3. I want to take and I want to stash him on a team for a year or two and then see what he looks like in year 3. I think that year 3, this kid could be that guy. He reminds me of a little bit I made a comment on him. I was writing it somewhere. I can't remember exactly where I wrote this down, but it was somewhere. And I had said in the piece that Eric Watts remind me a lot of what New England would typically like as a defensive end
Yeah,
under
I
what
like
they've
that.
done. Doesn't he look like the Dietrich Wise a little bit? Like
Yeah.
he could be Dietrich Wise in that
Yeah.
system. I think that there's a comp there, but that kid has outrageous power, incredible length. Those building blocks that he has are extremely interesting as a strong side defensive end in today's league.
Yeah, the Patriots notorious for taking late round guys and turning them into super productive rushers. So I
Yes.
definitely like that. That could be exciting for new head coach Gerard Mayo if he ends up with
That's it,
Eric
man.
Watts. 2 offensive linemen I want to bring up, Ryan. Not sure if you have anyone else. Ryan Rosengarten, who
Roger.
we talk.
Roger
Jeez, man, I am having a tough time
Ryan
with
is
it,
a good first.
dude.
It's a
It
great
has been
first name.
shut up. It has been a long day for the amount of recordings that I've done, and I still have a radio spot and another recording after this. But
Nice.
Roger Rosengarten, the Washington right tackle, as we discussed, rough kind of finish to the season during the playoff, wasn't great. Comes into the week, has a nice first day, and then today I think there was starting to really be a building of buzz for him where just looks so steady. And I think that he's establishing himself as a really strong late day 2 guy that's going to be really steady. The other one I want to bring up, which I don't know if you're as excited about him as I am, but I posted a clip about Satoa Lomanea, the Utah interior offensive lineman. Maybe he can play some tackle. I don't think that this is an early day 2 guy, probably more of a day 3 player, a stash player that could have a little bit of starting upside if you take him on day 3. But man, he didn't win every single rep, but there were a couple reps where he's really quick out of his stance and he does just a really good job mirroring and keeping guys in front of him. And you kind of can see those, those athletic tangibles for a guy like Lomanea.
I heard your post was a big hit, man. A little
Shut
young man
up.
named Cameron Rising.
Well, the Utah football account retweeted it. So big time over
nice,
here.
man. Nice. Yeah, I actually had not watched him on film. Senior Bowl. Obviously, I've seen him in just kind of working through the film, but I have not seen Utah film of Luminea. Is how you pronounce it?
I think it's Lomanea. Lomanea is what I'm going to go with.
Yeah, so haven't seen him yet. I'm excited because this is my favorite part of the draft process, Joe. There's always guys that show up to the Senior Bowl, and you're just like, I don't really know that much about that guy. I mean, like,
Mm.
there's a couple of like small school defensive backs, particularly, where I'm just like, I might need to go back and watch this kid a little bit. I don't know anything about him. So Lomanea might be a guy that's on that list. I love the mention of Roger Rosengarten. That kid, Joe, nothing he does is dominance, right? Like he's not a dominant presence in the fact that like he's just going to drive dudes off the ball and just eliminate guys left and right. But what he does, he just wins reps, man. Like he just
Mm.
wins. Like he just doesn't lose reps. Even reps that he perceives to have lost, quote unquote. He's a slow loser. Like he is a guy that just does not lose quick reps, which means that you're not giving up quick pressures, and that's going to buy you some time in the NFL. I think he's a starting right tackle very early on in his career. He even played some left tackle today, and I thought he looked
Yeah.
very natural playing left tackle. Like he's a starting offensive tackle regardless in the NFL. Quick shout out Isaiah Adams. Don't want to go super in depth on him because I know we're on a
Yes.
little bit of a time
Yes.
crunch, but I think Isaiah Adams, the offensive guard for Illinois that was forced to play outside at right tackle a lot this year for the Illini, good film in 2022 inside exclusively. And I think that kid is just solidly just stacked a couple good days, man. No one talks much about Isaiah Adams, but I think he's been pretty dang good for his squad over the first couple of days of the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, Adams again, another one of those guys. It's like not super sexy. Like not like you're
No.
watching him. You're like, it's not like Christian Haynes where you're like, he's kicking so much butt he's starting fights kind of a deal. And it's not like Gabe Hall who's blowing past people like we're seeing in these one-on-ones. Just getting his job done. And I also to round out Rosengarten feels like what we had last year with Matt Bergeron, where Bergeron just showed some really good stuff physically, but just was doing enough to consistently win the reps, and you never
Yep.
really heard anything bad about him, which usually means the guy had a pretty good week. It kind of gives me that, that
I'm
similar vibe.
I'm telling you, man, he's Mitchell Schwartz. I'm telling you this right now. I'm not going to say he's going to be a perennial All Pro like or perennial Pro Bowler like Mitchell Schwartz, but Mitchell Schwartz was one of those guys at right tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs and the Cleveland Browns. Just didn't lose reps, man. Like he just won reps. It wasn't
Yeah.
violent. It wasn't dominant. It wasn't sexy. Whatever hyperbole you want to use, but he just won, and he was just a really good overall football player, man. Big fan of Roger Rosengarten.
Two skill position players wanted to bring up Brevin
Yep.
Spanford, the tight end from Minnesota, 6'7". He's freakishly huge, not like a twitched up athlete, not like Theo Johnson, like we talked about, but I thought that we started to kind of see what you get with a long, tall tight end like that, where he can
Yep.
extend, he can take the ball out of the air, he can use his frame to really box guys out and keep them off of him. So I liked Brevin Spanford, and then Xavier Legette was really kind of hung out to dry the first day. And we talked about this yesterday where we didn't say he had a bad day, but it just felt like something was off. And part of it was because the balls that were thrown to him weren't great. And his reps just weren't like as clean as they could have been, but I wasn't really worried. And today that I really felt that Xavier Legette, the South Carolina wide receiver, had a much better day, that I feel a little bit more comfortable with him. And I wasn't worried, but like now I'm not even really thinking about him in a negative light at all. Like I'm just kind of moving on and thinking like, okay, Xavier Legette did what he needed to do, and I'm keeping him where he's at.
I know he was a guy that we both had on our list for today because I thought that Xavier Legette had a much better day than he did day one. I thought day one there were look, let's call it is. Quarterback play might have been not been great, but he struggled a little bit in day one. Like I think he was a little bit slow getting out of breaks and just being snappy at the top of routes. Today, because he's kind of a not super tall. I mean, he's actually sub 6'1", but like he's a thickly built outside receiver that isn't going to be the most dynamic as far as getting in and out of breaks. He's just a little bit of a longer legged guy. But regardless, he looked more explosive getting out of breaks. He looked more decisive with his movements today. He was able to create more separation than he was day one. And he got a lot of catchable passes and he made the plays. And he made one really nice play on a back shoulder. I forget who the quarterback was that threw him, but like it was a really nice adjustment in the air. This kid has that big body frame. He's got good body control, and he's an after catch dynamo, right? And so I think that those things start to show themselves a little bit more today. And this is what you want to see during Senior Bowl week. Day one, cool. If you have a great start, that's fine. That's awesome. But ultimately, you are judged based upon, did you improve? Day two, did you improve? Day three. The improvement throughout the week is what NFL evaluators really want to see. And you saw a massive improvement from day one to day two for Xavier Legette.
Last player I want to hit on before we wrap here, Ryan.
Yep.
Javon Bullard from Georgia, which we brought
Yeah.
up. The safety class that's been here is talented, but I feel like hasn't really flashed a whole lot. But Bullard,
Sure.
and I threw this out yesterday, kind of feels like a guy who could be a Brian Branch-esque, where some teams maybe don't know how to value him, but the team that takes him somewhere on day 2 is going to get just a really good nickel corner / safety that is going to play multiple spots, is going to come down and cover guys in the slot, is going to be able to maybe cover over the top or a portion of the field over the top. Like I think that Bullard is just a really, really clean football player. And I said this last year with Christopher Smith. Draft a Georgia defensive back, man, and you're not going to regret it. You're going to get a pretty good football player for the most part. The floor tends to be moderately high unless it's Keely Ringo.
I've maintained this, that I think Javon Bullard is probably the best nickel in this class. I think. I mean, there's a couple guys that are in that conversation, but he's a ready-made guy. Like year 1, you could start him at nickel, and you're going to have a solid starter, maybe even a plus starter near 1. Now, he also brings the diversity that I think he can play some safety because he's so smart and he's active and he's pretty physical, despite not being the biggest body guy of all time. Like he will come up and he'll stick you. He'll put his nose down in the run game. So I really like a lot of what Javon Bullard has brought to the field. A couple quick mentions just on defensive side of the ball from a defensive back perspective as well. I thought Cam Kitchens, I saw him a lot more yesterday than I did day 1. I didn't really notice Cam Kitchens a lot. Today, there were a couple plays when he was in man-to-man in the slot. They actually brought him down a ton in the one-on-ones. I thought he looked pretty good, man. I thought he looked loose and pretty good in and out of breaks. So it was good to notice him a little bit more on day 2 compared to day 1. And then, hey, man, I know we talked about him in Nauseam before the week started. I know we talked about him yesterday. But Quinyon Mitchell, again, Joe, like just again, dude, he's the best defensive back in Mobile.
All right, we're glazing it. We're glazing him a little too much. We're glazing him just like a little too much.
No, he's been fantastic.
I know. I feel like we're, like I had fatigue.
Here's a claim.
I had fatigue today of talking about him in a good way. I'm like, should I post more Quinyon Mitchell clips? I feel ridiculous doing it. But what were you going to say? Go ahead. What's your claim?
Through 2 days, I'm going to make a claim, and we can end the podcast off of you disagreeing or agreeing with it. Through 2 days, Quinyon Mitchell has been the most dominant football player on either team, in my opinion.
Yeah, he has been the best football player at the Senior Bowl in one of the most talented Senior Bowl classes that we've ever had. More than Lietu Latu, more consistently dominant. More than Lietu Latu, Talise Fuaga, Gabe Hall, Michael Hall Jr., Jackson Powers Johnson, all these guys that we've talked about. He has been the most consistently dominant. So I'm excited to see what happens with him. That kid's a first-round pick. You heard it here a while ago. You heard it here not now, but we talked about this months ago. At Joe DeLeone, at Rise and Draft. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Make sure you're subscribed, and we will be back with our day 3 recap and full recap later on this week.